Welcome to the Into Novus Knowledge Agronomy Podcast, your go-to resource for agronomic insights, technology solutions, and ongoing education. At Into, we combine agronomic expertise from soil analysis to best practice application methodologies to provide a holistic view for your yield optimization. Our focus is on practical strategies that improve efficiency and drive better results in the field. Join us for interesting discussions, expert advice, and the latest advancements shaping modern agriculture. Whether you're in the field, on the road, or at your facility, we're here to keep you informed and ahead of the curve. Welcome to the N2 podcast. Appreciate you all joining us again. Today, Derek is on with me again and Rodney as well. So how are you guys doing?
Morning, Nick.
Doing good. Doing good.
If you guys want to give us just kind of a brief update where we are as far as planning progress or activity, I could start. I'm the furthest behind. We do have some early April planted stuff or mid-April planted stuff. That's the earliest is approaching V5 now. But we have slugged a ton of corn in the ground in the last week and a half or so. And so we've got a lot of stuff that's just popping through or not even up yet. And then we're still planting a ton of beans right now. But Rodney, where are you guys at?
Yeah, we're 100% planted. We've got corn approaching that V4 to V5 stage also, so we'll be hitting V6 very, very soon. Soybeans, we're in that second unifoliate, headed to first trifoliate. We do have a small percent, probably less than 1%, that was planted in that April 26, 27, 28 time. Those seem to be the voodoo days this year, where we had some hard crusting and some needed a softening shower that we didn't get. So we had a little bit of replant, but nothing like in years past. So we're off to a good start.
Yeah. Derek?
Yeah, so similar to a couple of weeks ago, I'd say I'm still in between you and Rodney. We're not 100% planted. We still got a few guys putting some beans in and even some corn and things like that, but we're definitely not behind. Similar to what Rodney said, and I think where you're at too, our furthest along corn is in probably V3 to V4, but we will have some hitting that V5 in the next couple of days, getting ready to hit those critical stages. Soybeans are getting to that V2 stage. They'll be hitting V3 soon. But really the theme now is how dry we're getting. And so we're getting hotter, getting drier. Things are moving just a little bit slower, and really staying ahead of weeds right now has probably been the biggest thing going on in my territory right now. But so far what's up looks really good. I think we're setting pretty good for the year. So
awesome. Just a couple things we wanted to hit on today. One, just kind of stick with that theme of growth and development. So we'll talk a little bit about soybean growth and development and then flip into corn, and then really just want to spend the bulk of the time talking about that side dress, top dress application that's coming on corn. So Derek, I don't know if you want to start us off. You probably got some soybeans that are probably the furthest along, maybe with where we're at.
Yeah, and there's so many growers, and for good reason, that started with soybeans this year, and so they've gotten off to a good start. But I will say it was interesting this week, whenever I was out over the last couple of days scouting soybean fields, they really hadn't moved much since the week before. Maybe that second trifoliate has unfurled, I think, in a lot of beans, and so we got a lot hitting that V1 to V2, but that is kind of a critical stage, I guess, in soybeans. In that once our trifoliates come out, that's been another discussion about the cotyledons. We might see something on the cotyledons. They're only needed for about 7 to 10 days. Once our trifoliates start to unfurl, it's photosynthesizing, and that's where the plant is getting its energy at that point. The other big thing at V2 is that's when our nodulation kicks in. And so if you'll dig up plants, and I did this week, the nodules should be there. You can cut those open. They should be pink inside, but they should be delivering nitrogen to the plant at this point. And then the other big thing I'll say at V2 and after is when weed competition really starts to have an impact on the soybeans. And so, be thinking about your post pass and checking those. I know water hemp was coming strong in a lot of fields that I was looking at this week. And so we're reaching that critical weed-free period in soybeans at this point. They are nodulating, but overall, that's what's going on in beans right now. So
Appreciate that, Derek. Rodney, you want to talk a little bit on corn, where we're at, what we're approaching?
Yeah, so corn, like I said, it's coming on fast. I'm like Derek. We need a rain, and I have to say that tongue in cheek because not everybody's in that boat. But we're the crop is growing, but it's kind of I don't want to say it's stopped, but it's stressing a little bit because of the heat and
Yeah.
no water. And so we have to be cognizant of that because we're not getting elongation in the corn like we normally would. So we really have to watch our crop stage because that plant is actually older than its size right now. So the reason I bring that up is we're approaching the V6 stage, which is very critical in the corn plant life, in that it's going to determine how many rows around it's going to have on that ear at starting at V6. It also is going to start taking up nitrogen. And between V6 and R1, that corn plant's going to take up over 70% of the nitrogen needs in that time. So the reason we bring that up is we want to make sure that we have nitrogen available for the corn plant from here on out till we get to the R1 stage. And so we bring that up because we're I think all of us on the phone have corn approaching that crop stage, and so we want to make sure that we're watching and we make sure we don't have stress when we're determining rows around. um Derek, what are you seeing in your area?
Yeah, so I'd agree with those comments. Like you said, that rows around is going to be being determined quick. And I guess around top dress and things like that, this week is when I was really telling guys in scouting fields like, hey, this is going to be ready to go here soon. But this dry weather, I think, has got some people questioning or doubting what they should do. And my point is, it goes back to what you just said: is when we take up the majority of our nitrogen. That corn plant hasn't even started to begin rapid growth or anything like that. And so making sure we have those nutrients in place. It's way too early now based on this early season dry weather. And definitely if your corn got established well, you got a good even stand. You're exactly right. I was checking corn yesterday. That was strong V4 will be V5 in a couple days, but those nodes were just a little bit stacked. They're not elongating like you said because we're getting dry. We're going to hit that rain, and when it really wants its nitrogen, if we still don't plan on that top dress application, it's not going to have what it needs whenever it really wants to take off. And we're not there yet. And putting it out now will ensure here in a couple of weeks, whenever it really takes off, it's going to be incorporated. So I would still stay the course on your top dress plans, but also remember too, top dress just isn't always about nitrogen. I was looking at some fields yesterday where some pre-plant sulfur wasn't put out, and it was very evident. This is an opportunity that we have right now to address some other concerns than just nitrogen. But I would not at this point let the dry weather discourage you, because you dig down there a couple inches and down in the furrow, it's rooting down good, and there is still moisture down in there. We say we're always 10 days away from a drought, right? So I don't know why
Yeah.
this would surprise us. And so, we'll surely catch some rains. It's still mid-May, but certainly not a time where we want to deviate from what we'd already planned on doing, our management plan this early in the season.
Well, so just a couple things there. I guess not to. I want to hit on that. I want to come back to that. But one other thing, I'll go back to the corn and just the V6 and where we're at in that growth stage. You guys hit on it perfectly. We're determining rows around. I'd also mention too, that's when those nodal roots start taking over on that plant. We switch over to that nodal root system. Some years, we see, depending on if we're really wet or really dry, we might see that corn, that transition take longer. That corn gets kind of, we call it the ugly duckling stage, until those nodal roots get set down, and then it finds that anhydrous band and it takes off. So just be mindful of that. That's kind of the stage where you might see some of that ugly duckling stage, but once those nodal roots get set, it will take off and go down. On the other hand, compared to you guys, I mean, we are starting to dry out now. We're planting, and to Derek's point, like in Missouri, we're 2 weeks away from a drought when it rains. So it doesn't take long to dry out, but we're just getting to a ideal moisture stage more so than you guys. So our worries are a little different than yours. But I think, Derek, you did hit on a good point. You guys were talking about being drier. So I'm going to ask either one of y'all want to answer the question. But I think maybe with the side dress thing, we start with, do I do it or do I not, Derek?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, short answer to that is yes. There's several things, and Rodney, you can answer as well here, but the way I see it too, especially last year was a good comparison, to where we were getting wet, and we think about where's our other sources of nitrogen than what we put down last fall or this spring, and it's probably going to be coming from organic matter. The drier we get, the less moisture we have. We're not pulling nitrogen and even sulfur and other nutrients from our organic matter like we normally would, because that's very highly dependent on temperature and moisture. Well, if we're not getting the moisture, we're not going to be getting that nitrogen that pulling from that organic matter type deal. So definitely still stick with the top dress or even the side dress. And in a dry scenario, typically a liquid side dress application is probably going to be more efficient, even than a dry spread top dress application. But again, the short answer to that is yes, you still want to do it whenever it's dry, make sure it's in place. But certainly making sure you pay attention to that form of nitrogen whenever it's dry is going to be extremely important. Whether or not it's stabilized and what form you're going out with will be key.
Rodney, what about you?
Yeah, and I'll say we never want to give up on the crop. And in my area, we have a very good crop out there. The populations are almost perfect. And so therefore, we need to make sure we're feeding the crop so that it has the opportunity to get through the stressors, get through that nodal root stage, the ugly duckling stage, as Nick calls it. And if we don't do that, we're putting the plant at a little disadvantage. You guys have mentioned it more than once. We're 1 or 2 weeks away from a drought. We're in there, we will get rain. And so we need to plan for success, not failure. Um, uh, Derek hit on sulfur. When we're out there, we're more of a side dress setup. We need to make sure we have some sulfur in there too, because sulfur is as important or maybe more than nitrogen too, to allow that plant to do what it needs to do. I'll use an analogy. Anybody in the feeder cattle or feeder pigs, you vaccinate those animals when you get them. They're not sick when you get them, but we don't want them to get sick. And so I look at side dressing as giving the crop that vaccination to carry on and do the things. And what I have seen over the years, if we allow starting at V6 and we give it plenty of nutrients, not only the nitrogen, but the microbes, it's more efficient and it grows better and healthier up through that R1 stage. And so that's why we're talking today about what are your plans for nitrogen in the crop currently.
Well, and Rodney, you make good points there. I guess if we're basing our whether or not we top dress or side dress based on Mother Nature, if we don't do it, we are relying on Mother Nature 100%, because that nitrogen we get from organic matter, that sulfur we get from there, that is so highly dependent on Mother Nature. And so even though Mother Nature might not be giving us as much rainfall as we want, if we don't do any sort of in-season nutrition, we are fully relying on Mother Nature that nobody can predict. And crossing your fingers and sticking your head in the sand usually isn't a great management program. And so making sure we have that nutrition in place, regardless of the weather, is going to be a good idea.
So you guys have hit on several things there. I guess just to bring it back a little bit. So do I do it or do I not? I mean, I think you both hit on it. If it's part of your plan, we still stick to the plan. It's obviously way too early to deviate from the plan. You hit on mineralized N, Derek. I mean, we can get a lot of mineralized N from the soil. The problem is it's so unpredictable when it's going to come, and the year is going to depict Mother Nature further on out, more so than what's happening right now is going to depict how much of that we get. So we really can't bank on that right now. And then I mentioned this to you the other day. I'm in a different situation than you are. last year I felt like we were so dry in 22, 23 that we carried over a fair amount of nitrate and even sulfate probably in that upper profile. This year, that corn has been more yellow before we got the root system set down than what we've seen the last couple of years. And I just really don't think that we have that free nitrate laying around there like we did last year. So I think we're going to have to supplement more in my geography. And I especially think with the guys that have put on fall applied anhydrous and then we're planting here in the middle of May, we're about a month later than we thought. That's a longer gap before we get to that big uptake curve that Rodney was talking about, V6 to R1. So we're probably going to have to bridge that gap. That's more time to lose that nitrogen. Now, probably we haven't lost a ton yet, but if we get some more rain, a heavy drencher, we stay wet for a while and temperatures are warm, and we will lose quite a bit. One other thing I did just want to hit on, and I can ask either one of you guys this, but just how much do I put on? That tends to be a typical question. Do I do it or do I not? And then if I do it, how much do I use? What do I put on? What do you think, Derek?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's going to differ in every scenario. Again, I do think, and hopefully in most scenarios, that top dress is a planned, meaning you knew how much nitrogen you were going to want to put out up front in your fertility program. And so you already had you probably based off your yield goal, your total amount of nitrogen you put out, and you put out some up front and some post. But I would just encourage guys, depending, talk to whoever your local retail rep is, local agronomist, and talk about, okay, what's my soil type? What's the weather been like? Do I need to up that rate of nitrogen just a little bit or reduce that? But adjust those rates based on, your soil types, the weather, things like that, but also take into account how you're applying it and what form you are. That's going to be really important as well. But in general, we're typically going to fall in there to that 40 to 60 pounds of nitrogen, somewhere right in there. I want to keep that nitrogen as a rough rule of thumb, or that sulfur, in a 5-to-1 ratio with my nitrogen. But that's a rough rule of thumb there. It also depends on, did you split apply sulfur? Did you already put some out type deal? What is the demand of crop? Consider your yield goal, consider your soil type, and how much moisture we've had, and adjust that rate accordingly there. But I guess that's how I go about it, but it really does differ. There is no rule of thumb there. I know with nitrogen, we a lot of times keep it at a 1-to-1 ratio, 1 pound of nitrogen per bushel, but I would highly encourage adjusting that in season based on what your situation is, how much you put out, things like that.
Yeah, I think those are good points. If you're a ballparker like I am, you always want a ballpark to start with, and that pound per bushel is a good place.
Right.
Obviously, side dressing we can get more efficient, but it's a good place to start, and we can work back from there. I will say, just remember, if you're corn after soybean, less of a carbon penalty. Obviously, there's really none, but versus corn after corn. So corn after corn usually are going to require a little bit more.
And Nick, you mentioned that carbon penalty. There's some rye out there and some other cover crops, not even just rye. I know not a lot of people are following rye cover crop with corn, but there's a lot of residue out there, and we hit high corn yields last year. And so anybody that is doing corn on corn, or there does happen to be cover crop residue out there, that's something to consider, and why you might bump that up over that 1-to-1 ratio in certain spots. It's a good point.
Also, guys, a point I'll bring out, make sure you know your corn hybrids and genetics of today have changed. So 1-to-1 is a great rule of thumb, but make sure you talk to your seed person and know what those corn hybrids are available to do. The other comment in my geography, with deep prairie soils, sulfur, Derek's using 5-to-1. I'm more of a 10-to-1 guy because of the prairie soil, of the ability we have to use those nutrients and put it to yield. So a good rule of thumb, to me, 5 would be on the low side. And but make sure sulfur is as important as nitrogen. So we want to make sure when we're out there, we're making that trip, that we've got sulfur and even some boron in that pass.
Rodney, I'd be right there with you on the boron. I mean, what I've seen the last couple of years, we got to get I think foliar boron's good to supplement, but we've got to get a decent amount out there. And man, that top dress pass is a really easy, or if you're wide dropping, you're side dressing, it's a real easy way to get a significant amount of boron in there, and it's not costly. I mean, it's not an expensive thing to do. So I think it makes a lot of sense. The ratio of sulfur, nitrogen to sulfur, I think you somewhere in the realm between where you guys are talking at. I mean, for a total in program, old rough rule of thumb was always 10 pounds of in, 1 pound of sulfur. To Derek's point, as we get into more higher yielding situations, we tend to get closer to that 5 pounds of nitrogen and 1 pound of sulfur. So anywhere in between is probably fine. To Derek's point, if you're running 40 to 60 pounds of in, usually it's pretty easy just to do that 5 to 1. We're not talking a huge amount of cost there. The other thing I guess I did want to hit on was just, or a couple other things. One is the timing piece of it. I think Rodney already kind of got to it. You know, sometimes people ask, what's the best time to side dress? Years past, we used to do, seen lots of iterations of trying to do cute things, maybe wait until V10, maybe some guys wait until almost tassel, just trying to find what's the right time to drop that last little bit of in. I'll just say that there's been a lot of work over the years, especially university work, and it seems like all the data, and especially a lot of the new data, comes back and says V6 side dress application timing is as good as waiting till any other time to do it. So I feel like you can start just going ahead and applying that, or making the trigger, pulling the trigger at that time, at that V6 time. So,
Well, I think that goes back to our forms, right, Nick? I mean, you could throw naked urea out there and it's going to be gone in a couple of days if it's not incorporated. But that's where, we got a lot of acres to cover, and even within a given farm, you might have a lot to cover. But I think as long as you're applying it correctly with the right form of nitrogen, the right product, the right way, it really allows that flexibility to go ahead and start getting going here pretty quick.
okay, so Derek, that was a great lead in, because I think that's another question to answer. Some people might take it as, what's the best application method? There's argument whether we should top dress, or whether we should wide drop, or whether we should side dress, or Rodney, maybe we should put on anhydrous between the rows. So I think that's really the same question, by also asking what's the best form. We could talk placement if you want, but really the question comes back to, what's the best form? Is it 32%? Is it urea? Is it ammonium nitrate? Is it super U? Is it anhydrous? What is it? So I guess I'd ask both of you guys, what is the best way to do it? What's the best form to use?
Well, I guess, and the way I address that is, how are you set up? Not everybody has equipment to do all or any, but it's how, I can build a case for wide drop. I can build a case for 32. I can build a case for NH3, but it'll all come back to, how are you equipped and how are you able to get over your acres? And so, but doing nothing, we know, is not the answer. So however you're equipped to do it is how I look. All forms work, and it's just how you set up to get it done.
Yeah, I mean, Rodney hit on it. It is how you're set up. When we talk about forms, our ammonium type forms of nitrogen, or ammonium nitrate, like in the NKS product that we have to offer this year. I mean, that's going to be your stabilized ammonium forms, not going to volatilize, it's not going to leach, things like that. But even your urea forms and things like that, they can be successful if they're incorporated through rainfall or tillage, or if they're stabilized with a nitrogen stabilizer type deal. And so, as far as your forms go, but in terms of placement, sure, our liquid wide drop, and you're placing it right there and it's going to get incorporated in the soil, is probably going to be a little bit more efficient. But that doesn't mean, if you're not set up for that we can't make a solid application that's going to stick around and get incorporated as well. So it really, as how you're set up, it's just understand the form of nitrogen you're working with and figure out how you can deliver that, and then go from there. But I haven't met anybody that's set up a particular way that can't be successful.
That's a great point. That's where I always come back to too. I mean, I can show you data, and I've seen lots of people do it. I'll show you data that wide drop's better. I can show you data that liquid's better. I can show you data that anhydrous is better. But at the end of the day, just getting it put on is a much bigger differential than how you actually apply it, or what form you use. You are correct. I mean, that the ammonium nitrate, you wouldn't have to worry about that volatilizing like urea. But we can utilize, you mentioned stabilizer, so we could go into that part too. But we can utilize a stabilizer to buy us a couple weeks to wait on the rain to get it rained in. So, and then 32%, I mean, it's urea and ammonium nitrate together. So you've got all three forms of that within liquid, which tends to also work fairly well. With that said, so maybe to let Rodney or Derek, either one of you, kind of explain, but you mentioned a stabilizer with urea. We would be talking about a urease inhibitor. So, what does that stabilizer actually do with urea? If you're telling me I need to utilize one, then why would I utilize, let's say, something like NBPT agrotane, if you want to use that term, which there's a lot of generics for that. But
Go ahead, Derek.
Well, I mean, a urease inhibitor is just going to prevent the urease enzyme from breaking down our nitrogen into a volatile form. I guess to put it in simplest terms, which that does happen pretty quickly. So within 24 to 48 hours, if you got urea, so whether it's in urea ammonium nitrate or just straight urea, you are going to lose that into the atmosphere if it's not stabilized, and that enzyme isn't protected from. So I don't know if that's what you're looking. Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Derek. Yeah, no, that's exactly what I was looking for. Just to explain to them that you want
But
to
I
run
guess the
your
big point there is it happens very quickly. Now, it doesn't take that much rainfall to all but eliminate that, or that much incorporation, but we're not going to be able to do tillage here within our crop unless we're injecting the UAN. But in terms of dry spreading urea, we're not going to be able to use tillage. And so if we're relying on rainfall, you better make sure that happens within, like I said, 48 hours at least. But even 24 hours, you're starting to lose some of that nitrogen devolatilization with urea if it's not stabilized with a urease inhibitor. Now, again, like Nick said, I think he said 2 weeks. I mean, I don't want to get into, I guess, which urease inhibitor and product is better and things like that. But in general, yeah, the 2 weeks is probably, Nick mentioned ballpark. That's probably a good rule of thumb, but a lot of my areas haven't seen rain in 3 weeks either. So it's protection, but it's not a cure all either, using those stabilizers. So
I guess the thing we need to just hit on is be cognizant that you are dealing with a time of year where there's heat and sun, and that the potential of losing what you just put out there is great. So make sure we put an inhibitor on that, or be cognizant of that, because we're also dealing with a product that's more valuable today than in other years. So make sure we stabilize it so we still have it for the plant to use.
Yeah, those are good points. And that I just wanted people to understand when you're using urea, a urease inhibitor, extremely critical. When it comes to something like anhydrous and nitrification inhibitor, when I'm side dressing, probably not really that important because I want that ammonium to go ahead. It's a more stable form to be available right away. Yeah, we could have discussion about a nitrification inhibitor with liquid, et cetera, in a side dress pass. But that corn plant is going to be sucking that nitrogen up fairly quick. So it becomes less critical, but it is definitely critical with urea, especially if that canopy is open and it's able to volatilize out the top. Like Derek said, if we go quite a while without a rain, it's not a good thing for just straight urea. With that said, any other last points you guys want to make?
No, I guess overall, like I said, crop looks great. And yes, we're getting a little bit dry, but and from what I've seen across Northwest Missouri, guys should be optimistic. They should be staying the course with their management plan. And I think if we do that, we're still on the right track to having a good crop this year. So,
Rodney?
Yeah, the ditto what Derek just said. Got to talk for my area. It's great crop there, and let's help it finish out, or long way to the finish line, but let's help it get there.
yeah.
Yeah, the only other last thing I would add that I kind of had written down in my notes was just, if you're looking for other nutrients, you're wanting to play around with things, top dress. One other thing you might think about, potassium. There was some work years ago about potassium being side dressed with nitrogen, and not a blanket recommendation I'm making. It's just something that if you had a few acres you want to play with high yield or something, you want to do something different, something to think about. Depends what data you look at, but in that corn plant V5 to tassel or so, it's taken in as much as some people say 10 pounds of potassium a day, which is a tremendous load on the soil, especially if you have lower testing soil. But I just wanted to mention that one other thing. Otherwise, yeah, I appreciate your time, and hopefully you're able to take a little bit out of this information wise, especially from the side dress pass. And if you guys have any questions, be sure to let us know. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time. Thank you for joining us. This podcast is brought to you by Into Novus Knowledge. Please reach out to your Into agronomist if we can help in any way. Join us next time for more in-depth agronomic advice.